We are going to continue in our series, Faith for the Fire. Faith for the Fire. This is a series that is encouraging us to desire more of God in our life. We all need to have more of his presence in our life. We need to seek him more. And the Lord, God, he is described as a fire. There are three specific places, two of them in Deuteronomy, one of them in Hebrews, that he is referred to as an all-consuming fire. Fire is a consuming element. Sister Vern has a dear friend in her park that knows the unfortunate truth of how consuming fire can be, as her friend had a major fire in her mobile home this week, and it's totally destroyed. So normally fire is something that we're cautious with, but when we're having faith for the fire, this isn't a fire that we're trying to avoid. This is not a fire that we're trying to dread or that we're weary of. This is not a fire that we fear. This is a fire that we pursue. This is a fire that we celebrate. This is a fire that we want more and more and more and more of. This is a fire that we have faith for. And we kicked off our series last week and we looked at Moses and the burning bush, and we saw that burning bush moments aren't always necessarily this place of great revelation in our life. Yes, they can be. They can be a place of great revelation, and we'll kind of touch on that a little bit more this morning. But more simply put, burning bush moments are just simply times when God shows up. When he shows up where you are at in that general time. Now, as of now, at this point of the series, it has not been my intention to be in Exodus chapter 3 the entire time. But after looking at last week and looking at how we get to the fire, that we get to the fire when we're on the run, we get to the fire when we're in our routines, we get to the fire when it randomly kind of is set before us, I really felt impressed this week to see what happens when we are there at the burning bush, when we are at that encounter where God shows up. So I want to look again in Exodus chapter 3. It'll probably sound a little familiar to you because we read it last week, but let's start again in verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. And so Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Now, I know some of you here today have probably heard this phrase before. In fact, when I say the first few words of it, I'm sure you would be able to complete it today. What happens in Vegas? See, it's a good thing you're in church this morning. It's a good thing. This morning, I want to put a little spin on that. What happens at the burning bush leaves the burning bush. What happens at the burning bush? It leaves the burning bush. Most people, they have places they dream of going. They have places that, it's a bucket list. This list of places, if they could go anywhere, even right now, if the door opened up and you could go, it doesn't matter that it's 10:35 on a Sunday morning, you're already at church. This is your opportunity. You're getting up and you're going because it might never come again. I did a quick search this week on the internet, and wouldn't you know, there's like 1,000 articles on the top places that people want to go. So I just chose one randomly. And these were some of the obvious places that people desire to go to and would dream to go to. Right at the top of the list, Hawaii. I mean, it feels kind of strange to say out of all the places in the world, but maybe because it's just so disconnected from the rest of continental USA, maybe because it's just such this tropical paradise, maybe because we live in Florida and we're in the tropics. I don't know. But whatever it is, Hawaii is right there at the top of the list. Another one, China is another one, or Japan is another one. A lot of people love to go see the culture and the history of those areas. Iceland was there. Actually, the article I saw described it as the nature lovers or the photographer's dream destination. No other place like it. Uh, I personally would love to go here, New Zealand, or to Australia. We're going to group those two together. If I'm in that region of the world, I'm going to both. All right. They're right there. I'm not going to one without going to the other. Going to make the time. If we're going to Europe, England, that's big. We would have said a couple months ago, see the Queen. Now we're going to say, go see the King, right? Go see Buckingham Palace, going to go see the history. Big Ben, going to go experience the history of England, or maybe the history of Greece. Greece was a popular one. This one I love because we have the connection with Sister Rem. The Philippines was on that list, Sister Rem. And just the place where she has spent the majority of her life. She could have let us know how wonderful the Philippines is and why people go there and make it a bucket list kind of destination. You know, we're living in a day and age where, except for political turmoil, there is absolutely no place on earth that is inaccessible, even within a reasonable amount of time. Even places that are really no longer even on Earth. I mean, as a private citizen, did you know you could book a ride on a Blue Origin rocket and now travel into space? Pastor Christy says sort of, because it's a low orbit, but it's still space. You're still floating in that capsule. Sure, it costs like $28 million to do. This is my take on it. The price will only go down from there. I was looking at their website the other day just to see they actually have a form that if you want to go, you could fill out the application. And I was thinking about filling it out and saying, you know what? When that price gets to around that $1,000 price point, go ahead and put me on the list, all right? Side note, not really a side note, but kind of on the same subject, Tom Cruise, he's about ready to film his next movie in space. In space. It's an incredible time we live. You know, some places we go to because this is just plain fun. We love to go to places that are just plain fun. I enjoy a larger city environment. I enjoy the tall skyscrapers. I enjoy the bridge work. So you're driving downtown Orlando now. If you've been up there recently, it's all reworked. I mean, there's a dozen new bridges, all of that. I love looking at the bridges, driving through a city. I love stadiums and large structures, skyscrapers. I really enjoy that. Other places we go to, maybe I've never been to some of these, but it's just the wonder of what is possible when people work together in a common goal and work together with a common purpose. Places like the Great Wall of China, or the pyramids of Egypt, or even something even relatively local like Mount Rushmore. It's just incredible to see what is possible through people working together. After seeing places like Yosemite, has anybody ever seen Yosemite before? Sister Susie and Yolanda, you've seen Yosemite. It's just, it changes you. It marks you, just the wonder and the grandeur of such an incredible landscape. I've been to Niagara Falls before, and just incredible. Doesn't even describe the amounts of water that fall over that cliff all day, every day, and has done that for thousands of years now. I was imagining this week what it would have been like in the 15 or the 1600s, and you're the original North American settlers, and you're in that region, and you just by happenstance come along Niagara Falls. Hopefully you've been walking through the woods and not in a boat on Lake Erie. Some of you got that. It'll come later, all right? But when you get there, you don't just stop and say, oh, well, that's neat. That's awesome. That's cool. What's next? No. You stop for a moment. You take it in. You enjoy the place. The burning bush is a place of divergence, a place where we begin the encounter one way and we depart another. It's not a place where we just say, oh, wow, this was a neat experience, God. What's next for me? No. You hold on to the moment of the burning bush. Moses, when he encountered it in Exodus chapter 3, he has left his home and his family, and he goes to do what he has done so regularly over the past 4 decades of his life. And he goes to tend to his father-in-law's sheep. And when he encounters the burning bush, what happened there didn't stay there, it went with him. When Moses went home, he went home a different person. When Moses went home, he had changed. His priorities had changed. His purpose had changed. He had seen something that he would never forget. He had heard something that is going to echo in his mind for the rest of his life. God wants to meet with you, and he wants to commune with you. He wants to converse with you. And though he is the same yesterday, today, and forever, I find that he rarely does things the same way twice. And so if you happen to walk out of the front doors of the church today and you see one of our crepe myrtle bushes on fire, grab a hose. It's probably not a supernatural experience. But what that does mean is that there is a supernatural encounter waiting for you this week. It's just a matter of, do you have faith for the fire? Will it be an encounter that you allow to happen? Moses, he has a choice. He has a choice. He could have ignored the burning bush altogether, never venturing over to it. He could have heard the voice and he could have ran away in fear and in fright. There's not angels holding him in place. He has a choice. He made the decision to go over and see what, and to allow what's happening to happen. I mean, I'm sure you've heard the hypothetical question that preachers have said for decades. I wonder how many burning bushes Moses passed along the way of his previous 40 years of being in Midian before this one got his attention. But the point is he allowed the moment to happen. And if we have faith for the fire, if we allow it to happen, we will never be the same again. So this morning, I want to talk to you about 3 things that happen at the burning bush. 3 things that happen. First of all, at the burning bush, our identity will be reshaped. Our identity is going to be reshaped. Look at verse 6 with me in Exodus 3. Then he said, I am the Lord God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hit his face because he was afraid to look at God. This is the moment where God became real to Moses. If you remember last week how we talked about how Moses, he was raised in Egypt by an Egyptian mother. So I would imagine he is very familiar with the gods of Egypt. We also talked last week about how he's a Hebrew. He's one of God's chosen people. He was born a Hebrew, and this knowledge of who his identity is might be why he finally kills the Egyptian after mistreating his fellow brother. So when God introduces himself as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, it's possible Moses understands what he means. It's also possible this is maybe the first time Moses has even heard those names before. I mean, I don't think we could really know which way it is, but what we can know is this. This is the day that God became real to Moses. Not an abstract thought or a name that maybe he's heard of in the course of his 80 years of life. Not just this lifeless statue or image that he remembers from growing up in Egypt. Moses is experiencing a physical manifestation, an actual voice, his sight and his hearing, and even his smelling senses being stimulated, able to perceive something real right before him. And when you perceive God, when you perceive his realness, whether it's for the first time or the 10,000th time, a change is going to occur. Any encounter with the living God will result in a change of who we are. It's been said before, it'll be said again. You cannot enter the presence of God and not be changed. This was the day that Moses, he was going to look back and he was going to see his identity was transformed. Before, he identifies as a fugitive. Before, he's identifying as a farmer. After the burning bush, now he identifies as favored because God lets him know how favored he is. When we come across burning bush moments in our life, the times or the places God has come to meet us, these are the moments we become a different person. We are never the same again. The first burning bush we possibly see is in the form of a cross. It's in the form of the cross where we first see Jesus. We first see who he is and what he's done. There's this old hymn that we sang about how at the cross, where I first saw the light. And the burden of my heart, it rolled away. It was there by faith. I received my sight. And now I am happy all the day. But the cross, it's not the only burning bush moment that we have in our life. We are continually changed. Our identities are continually transforming. Every time we encounter him at an altar, every time we encounter him in the Word of God, every time we encounter him in a time of prayer in the front seat of our car at a red light, our identity has the possibility to be changed. I love this verse, and I throw it out every few weeks or so because it is so true. Philippians 1:6, he who began a good work in you, he is going to bring it to completion. He is continually shifting and transforming and molding you into who he wants you to be. I'm sure throughout your tenure of following Christ, I bet you can see how you've identified yourself has been transformed multiple times. Multiple times. You know, if you decide to tune out right here, I'm going to say something. And if you decide to tune out right here, it might be one of those phrases that would get me in trouble. So don't tune out right here. All right? Don't tune out right here. Your identity is supposed to be fluid. It's the evilness and the depravity of a generation that we live, in the day and age in which we live, that has contorted this truth to mean your sexual identity. But the truth is this: you don't choose your identity, God does. You might believe you're broken, but God, when he encounters and he meets with you, he identifies you as whole. You might believe your shame and regret is all you have to live for. But God, when he decides to reveal himself to you and you have that encounter with him, your identity is reshaped into one that is chosen by him. You might believe you're a pessimist this morning, that you can only look at the bad side of things, that you could never see the positive in anything. God can reshape you. He can reshape you into one who is hopefully expectant. You might believe that your only hope is to be anxious and uptight about everything. God declares that you can be at peace. And peace, which surpasses all understanding, can be the thing that identifies you. Your identity can continually be reshaped. And it happens when God shows up. The burning bush moments in your life, they transform who you are, and your identity is forever changed. Secondly, this morning at the burning bush, his intent will be relayed. Look at verses 7 through 10. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the land of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Moses, at this point in his life, he has one agenda. Just one single agenda that he's concerned with. He's going to take care of the sheep that are in his care. And I'd imagine he's happy and content in doing it. He's not really looking for a change, not looking for any sort of drastic new beginnings at this point in his life. He already had his starting over moment 40 years before. He's 80 years old now. He spent half of his life in Egypt in what I would imagine would be high stress situations, seeing his own people abused and mistreated. I mean, after 4 decades of that, it makes sense why he finally snapped and goes off on the person that's doing that. The other half of his life he spent as the fugitive, and he's been in the peace and in the calmness of farming for the past 40 years. So I'd imagine Moses is here and he's happy doing this for the rest of his life, and then God shows up and he lets Moses know what his intent for him really is. And he tells him how he has seen the misery of his people, how he's heard them crying out, how he's concerned about their suffering, and now how he is coming, and he's coming to bring them out of the land of Egypt and into that promised land, that land with milk and honey. And he says, now go, because I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people out of Egypt. This series, Faith for the Fire, faith for all of God that you can possibly have. You might say, I want burning bush moments in your life, but you might want to ask yourself, are you sure? Are you sure? Because the burning bush is a place where his intent is going to be told. You may be intent on your agenda, and God is going to show up with his. And when God shows up with a plan, it's most likely going to be uncomfortable. It's usually not going to be something you would ordinarily do. It's going to take you to places you'd rather not be, and it's going to push you to limits you'd rather not reach. What is presented to Moses, it's not abstract or ambiguous. What is presented is clear and precise. I have seen, I have come, I am sending you. Kind of sounds a little familiar if you ask me. Kind of sounds like where we're at in the boat that we're in as followers of Jesus. He has seen the sin of his creation. He has come in the form of his own son, and now he is sending us. God intends for his message to be relayed. Moses proclaimed, let my people go to Pharaoh, so that God's people, his chosen people, would be released from the burden of slavery. He intends for us to proclaim John chapter 14, verse 6, that Jesus, he is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to the Father except through him, so that all people can be released from their burden of sin. God intends for his power to be displayed. God's power was displayed through Moses. It's displayed through 10 plagues. It's displayed through the parting of the Red Sea. Later on down the story, later on down the line, it's displayed through water from a rock. And through the power of the Holy Spirit, we too can echo that sentiment. Paul himself said in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 4, that my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with what? With a demonstration of the power of the Spirit. God intends for his people to be truly free. It took some time. After this, it took another 40 years for them to finally be able to take hold of that land flowing with milk and honey, that promised land. But those people, they stepped into the promised land the same way that they stepped out of slavery in Egypt. The parting of the Red Sea took them out, and the parting of the Jordan River took them in. It might have taken some time in our day and age, but there's going to be a time where we step out of this existence and we step into the fullness of God's promise for those who decide to follow him, those that give his life to them, and the reward and the fullness of God's grace and mercy will be fully revealed. At the burning bush, God will reveal his intent. He still does it the same way. It's still presented in a clear way. It's still presented in a precise way. I might not like it. Moses didn't like it. But there will be no denying what it is. I might not have all the details of how it's going to happen. I might not have all the details of how I'm going to let that offense go. I might not have all the details of how I'm going to love that person that I've got to love this week. But there's no shortage of details that we lack. When I have faith for the fire, I don't have the excuse of ignorance. His intent will be made known. Finally, this morning at the burning bush, my inadequacy, it's going to be reinforced. Look at verse 11. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" You know, there's nothing quite like the moment of God's presence to reveal how inadequate I truly am. And this is what Moses is going through in Exodus chapter 3, because he knows who he is. He knows he's the murderer. He knows that he's, by all intents and purposes, a coward. He ran from Egypt. And he knows he's insecure. And so he rebuts to God, and he comes up with all these excuses. Oh, what if they don't believe me or listen to me? He knows he's not a good speaker, and so he starts giving excuses. Well, I'm slow in speech. I'm slow in tongue. He doesn't want to go, so he just flat out says, send someone else, God. God's presence is perfect and complete, and his presence, it reveals what is lacking in me. And when I have that revealed before me, that can be so tormenting. It can be such torture to see that stain and blemish that I represent in the presence of such perfection and wonder. But his presence is relief for all of my torment. In fact, inadequacy, you know what that does? It spurs more of a desire for him. The pain and discomfort that Moses felt in verse 11, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, brings the peace and comfort of verse 12. God said, I will be with you. Our inadequacy will always be reinforced by his ability. He is all we need. His power is made perfect in my weakness. His choice is the weak and imperfect. Probably one of my favorite verses in the Bible is 1 Corinthians chapter 1, 27 through 29, because it speaks so plainly to who I feel I am. God chooses the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chooses the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chooses the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. You know, it wasn't immediate. It took some time, but not as much time as you maybe would think it would take. Moses, he was able to work through his insecurity and his doubt. When Moses, he first met God, he was afraid to look at him, and so he hid his face in verse 6. But a relatively short time later, maybe just a few weeks, maybe it had even been a couple months by that point. It's after they leave Egypt. He's back at the same mountain he's at now. He's on the top of the mountain now. And he boldly proclaims to God, God, now show me your glory. Show me your glory. You want to know what brings about that change? You want to know what makes him so confident in that time now? He takes God as his word. He takes God at his word. He had lived firsthand power revealed in his weakness. He has been the embodiment of the lowly and despised, bringing shame to things that are not lowly and despised. And so when he's confronted with the torment of his inadequacy, once again in Exodus chapter 33, and he's looking at God and he's saying, you have told me to lead these people. You have told me to lead them and to take them and to go. How could I do this without you? Show me your glory. He knows that it's not about his inadequacy. It's about God's ability. So he turns to what he knows he needs. Another burning bush moment in his life. Another moment where he is going to encounter God. Because the more you experience, the bolder you get. The more you experience, the bolder you get. Moses, he encountered this burning bush. What happened there didn't stay there. It went with him. In fact, every encounter he had with God went with him from that point on. The burning bush went with him to Egypt. The mountaintop experience at Sinai went with him into the desert. Because what happens at the burning bush leaves the burning bush. What God does in you when he meets with you is meant to be carried with you for the rest of your life. You're supposed to remember the glory and the splendor and the beauty and just the incredible time in that moment that you have with him. Because it's in these moments that your identity, it is reshaped. It's in these moments that his intent, it is relayed. And it's in these moments that your inadequacy is reinforced by his ability. So take the moment with you. Take the moment with you. This morning, I'm going to ask you to bow your head and close your eyes with me.